Hey everybody, this is the Edge podcast for CHRO. This is our third episode with Rajeev Menon and Nisha, my co-host here. So in this episode, we'll be covering a lot around assessments and a lot of interesting things around what HRs can potentially do in terms of carving out their budget for the next financial year, and essentially how the scene will look like in the post-pandemic world. So with me, I have Rajeev, and I'll just take 2 minutes to give a quick introduction and let Rajeev tell us his story as well. So Rajiv is a thought leader in the talent assessment space and having led product at Tailview. Rajiv started his career as an computer sales professional and then moved on to be a thought leader in assessments. He's a product innovation specialist who has been responsible for the creation of several behavioral and personality assessments and tech-enabled delivery platforms. So Rajiv, please tell us more about you.
Hey, thanks, Varun. Thanks for the quick intro. Yeah, so just a quick. I thought it'll be quite relevant to stake my claim in terms of why I can speak on all this. So I've been associated with the acquisition and the HR tech space for about 16 years now. Been with companies like Meritrack, one of India's pioneering assessment companies, and also with company called Talview. Talview is again from on the technology front. As Meritrack was the core assessment front, then moved into technology. Talview has done technology first, and then they're adding assessments as an important element of what they offer to the market. So in the course of my connects with these companies, I worked with Pearson a little bit, Jombe in the past, and so on and so forth. So all of these companies, I've had the opportunity to deal with many recruitment and HR leaders, India and APAC primarily. I've interacted with them from an early stage when they were hiring like crazy. Right? When I say hiring like crazy, it was just about, and there were anecdotes about anyone with 2 legs and 2 hands can get hired. That was the kind of scenario in, let's say, middle of 2000s, where the BPO boom was really fueling the entire hiring space in India, and IT services as well. So I've been working with them, many of them at that point of time, and now they've become very great, much larger leaders in their organization. So interacting with them and tracking how things have changed was very exciting. My passion continues to be human capital measurement. I think that's something that continues to interest me. How you can use newer research, newer technologies to get more and more accurate. Because I think the holy grail of assessment is to see how accurately and how quickly can you evaluate someone to fit a particular role. And I don't think people have got it right yet. But that's improving over a period of time. I don't think it's reached a stage where it is absolutely right. The other thing that really fuels my passion is this entire concept about diversity and inclusion. That's something that I'm very passionate about, because I think it's about time that it moves away from being just a checkbox in a in an HR outcome to actually being main stage, right? And I'll probably explain a little bit about it as we go through the conversations in the next 35 minutes. But yeah, so these are two areas that really excite me. I continue to be associated with the multiple companies as a strategic business consultant, Talview being one of them, where I advise on various elements of business strategy focused on HR tech, recruitment tech, assessments, and diversity and inclusion. So that's just a little bit about me.
Rajiv, that was brilliant. Rajiv, I have one intrinsic follow-up question to that actually. What really? So you've told a lot about how you're passionate about this space and how you've been associated with companies of different scales, right from the start, right? What inherently drives you? What makes you think that this is a space that everyone should be really excited about? What do you think? Is where do you think the space is headed in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years? What drives
Sure,
your enthusiasm personally as well, right?
sure. So if you really look at how economies are built today, right? It is primarily a knowledge economy. Most of the stuff is around people. I think it's become extremely people centric. From the earlier industrial revolution age, where it was machine centric, we are moving to a people centric age. It's not necessarily there yet. We still treat human resources as machines. HR, when I say human resources, as I'm talking of employees as machines, just there to deliver a particular piece of work. It's not that anymore. I think that view is changing drastically, driven by the new age generation that's coming into the workforce, as well as new business realities as well. So to me, that evolution is something that really interests and intrigues me. And with the changes that are coming in, how do you equip yourself to measure, to manage, and to ensure that each of the persons in the organization is contributing is being his or her best, and contributing the most to the outcome of the company business. I think that's the thing. And more importantly, I think the today it's very, very clear that business leadership comes only from its employees, right? Companies are doing well. If you look at the likes of Google or Microsoft and many of the other organizations, even some of the latest startups like Salesforce, they're extremely people centric, and the people centricity actually comes out quite a bit. And I think that's critical. As long as we are able to move there, I think we are on the right track, and that's what excites me. And how some of those things get managed, from assessment to talent learning to performance management. All of those things are really very interesting for me.
Interesting, Rajiv. Interesting that you bring this out, that people are at the heart of the organization, because I think somewhere during the pandemic, it was more like technology was at the heart of everything, right? So coming back to this, how will technology really affect the new workplace, keeping people at heart? I would add that one aspect there. And how do we, so there's one part to it, how do we ensure seamless collaboration, but also how do we ensure in that context empathy and also people centricity?
Yeah, great questions, actually. Great question. Yes, I think the focus was unnecessarily on technology when the pandemic came in. The focus should always have been people. I think there are tons of stuff being written by great leaders today about how employees are the core of everything. Vineet Nayar's book on Employees First is I think it's a classical book of how focusing on employees actually helps you drive your business outcomes much better, right? Uh, what has happened, and this is not sudden change. Many of these technologies were emerging, so people were using Zoom, people were using Slack, people were using virtual conferencing and so on and so on, but almost like touching their feet in water. They were just testing it out, right? What the pandemic did was actually push them into the water. There is nothing else that happened, right? So it's now become an imperative. You need technology. You can't live without technology anymore. How will it change? It will change because there's a significant cultural change required. So if you look at workplaces of the past, it was office centric or physical location centric. You go to a workplace, you used to have cabins in the past, then became smaller cubby holes, and there are work desks, and then there are floating work desks, and all these concepts came in. And you will find that the most important element that has to change is the way we interact with people. One key element is trust. How do you get trust into the entire conversation? Trust becomes the core of everything. In the past, for example, 9 to 5, you will even see work letters in the past which says that you are expected to come to work from 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock every day, right? That structure it has to get destroyed. There is no 9 to 5 work anymore. You work for an objective. You can't the effectiveness of work can't be measured by how many hours you work, or whether you sit in your seat and don't do anything else and stuff like that. All of those things are completely off. You will see this being forced on people today. What this entire pandemic has done is focused on, I think you speak about hybrid working. I think hybrid is it is not even an option anymore. It is mandate. And when hybrid also is not that some people will work in office and some people will work at home. Everyone will work at home. You will have an opportunity to go to office if you want for a day or two, whatever. I think many companies are already talking about it, saying that we will expect you to be in office for just a day or two. And that too, I think they're trying to create that human connect more than anything else. It's not that you need to be in office to perform your work, because it's a knowledge economy. As long as you have access to, I'm talking of some of all of the kinds of jobs that have really increased in the last 8-10 years. Manufacturing, for example, will still be location centric, or many of those old economy companies will continue to be there. But all new economy companies that are coming in, all new economy work that's coming in, can easily be done remotely. But it requires a cultural change, and cultural change, I think, people first, as I spoke about earlier. Everything has to do with people. The second is about trust. How do you make an employee trust? How do you develop the trust for the organization in the employee, right? The reasons why you look at keeping tabs on people, etc., is because you don't trust them, right? If you start off the conversation saying that I don't trust you, so therefore I have to monitor you all the time and stuff like that, you are never going to get the trust back from the employee. Employee just say, okay, boss, I have a 9 to 5, just do some task and go back and you pay me the money. But that's moving, because the new generation that's coming in says that, look, I want to work where I have passion connected to my work, and therefore allow me to demonstrate to you what work effectiveness is. You give me an objective, you give me a task, I will do it. You give me a timeline, I'll do it within the timeline. How I do it is not something that I want you to come and monitor me all the time. Micromanagement is gone, it's dead. I think in the past is one of the most abhorred things that any employee will say, I'm being micromanaged by my manager and stuff like that. It in fact is probably the biggest cause of employees leaving organizations. Micromanagement, that's completely gone. It will be objective based management. You give an objective and get the guy to do. Some of the things that you need to change, I think HR again becomes very critical here, is how do you make the change? How do you get technology to remove all the mundane stuff, right? In a regular work environment, things like coordinating for meetings, stuff like that will completely go. In the past, for example, you could just walk across a desk, talk to someone and come back. That is not going to be there anymore, because the guy, the person in your team, the next person in your team might be in probably a different continent altogether. So that is not going to happen. So you'll have to fix up time for that person for you to catch up with the person, and so on and so forth. So what will happen is then the meetings get very, very objective driven. It can't be casual meetings anymore. You will have to drive a specific objective for the meeting, set the agenda. So some of these are cultural changes that need to come in. It's not easy, because in the past, not all meetings were driven by clear structures, right? The second thing that HR will have to then work on is about building a truly inclusive work culture. It becomes even more important now, because in the past, at least in a physical room, it is slightly easier to create that inclusion. In a digital room, it's even more difficult. Right? Many people will just completely clam up. How do you get them to speak up? How do you get them to contribute? That becomes important. And that can happen only if it becomes a culture. Every interaction, every meeting, every employee has to show inclusion to the next person. It can't be, an inclusion can't be again a checkbox driven by the or just seen in this 5 leadership meetings and on certain days like International Women's Day and International Disabilities Day. That is not inclusion. Inclusion has to be an every minute culture in organization. I think that will be the biggest driver of change that HR will have to focus on. How do you make inclusion the single biggest contributor in collaboration? And those things will come in, for example. Technology enables all of this. So whether it is Slack, whether it is Teams, whether it is Trello, there are a ton of technologies that are already existing there. All of this are constantly getting innovated, constantly adding new features are getting added up. So to ensure that, for example, things like, I think we didn't have things like a virtual background in the past. It's like very simple things. And the virtual background was important. Why? Because many people said, look, I don't want to come on video on screen because I don't know what my background looks like and I don't want to give a wrong impression. All it required was a very small change, and you can change virtual background, you can blur your screen, you can do a bunch of things. So technology is constantly moving. But to get the technology to move, you need to show that, yeah, you're trying to do all these things. You have to define what needs to get changed. So I think to answer your question of how tech will affect the new workplace, technology will become an undercurrent everywhere. It will not be the main anymore. People first will be the approach that will have to work. Anyone that doesn't have a people first approach in the new age is doomed for failure. I think that is where it's going to be. And seamless collaboration, as I said, how objectives are written, how do you interact with people, how do you set objectives for a meeting, for everything from a meeting, etc., comes into picture. In addition to tools, there are let's say frameworks as well. For example, OKR. From the annual appraisal kind of a cycle, you will now move to something called like a very nimble framework like OKRs, for example, and we'll talk a little more about it as well. OKRs now then become a critical, frameworks like OKRs become critical to ensure that irrespective whether you're a remote worker or sitting anywhere in the world, you are still able to align yourself to the objective that is at hand and work seamlessly. And so some of these things, technologies, frameworks, cultural change, all of these put together will make the new workplace much better than in the past, and will bring out the best out of employees, because employees will not have to do any mundane stuff anymore.
Rajeev, I think you mentioned some pretty interesting, some pretty cool points there, especially around the fact that inclusion should be really the main highlight of every single day of an organization. So I want to understand one thing, right? You mentioned that technology will become a very important enabler in all of these things. As you mentioned, what stood out was that technology is going to be the undercurrent, and that was a brilliant way to phrase it. So what do you think the tech strategy should be that companies should adopt, right? Small companies, mid-sized companies, and larger ones have already had their processes and tools set in place, right? And if you could sort of help us understand how this really differs with a product-led company and a sales-led company, right? Because I think the nuances there happens in terms of how they sell and how they interact inside the organization itself. Because let me give an example, right? If it's a sales-led company, naturally the sales in the market, and the prospects, and the pipeline that's built in every geography really drives every team to do certain things, every team to set their OKRs and all of these things. So there, of course, probably I would need better alignment, probably a framework like OKR, or probably some other frameworks would really make my alignment there better. But in a product-led company, that things are, the ball game is very different there as well. The product team basically guides everything else, and all the other teams sort of follow it there. In that case, more complex frameworks would really come into place, like Kano model, Rise, a bunch of these things would really come to place to figure out the North Star metric, the vision, the mission, and say, okay, look, this is where we want to be, align yourself to this, right?
Okay.
Giving all of this in mind, what do you think the tech strategy should be?
So from a tech strategy perspective, I think getting the basics right is first important, right? Have you digitally enabled all your employees is critical. Is every employee that you have completely digitally enabled becomes an important tech input or tech strategy. I think you will start using, so some of the things around tech strategies. If you Today many companies have gone like shopped for multiple technologies for various elements. So you have like 10 different things. You give an employee 10 different screens to start going and updating stuff, he's going to get tired of it, right? Things like, how can you build a common interface? How do you prevent people, how do you reduce inertia from multiple platforms? So because it is very difficult to find one single platform that can give you everything, right? Someone, as I said, so for example, you could have one platform that's helping on the sales side, sales automation side. There could be another platform that's helping on, let's say, product automation side, right? But as a company, you need the product and the sales guys to talk to each other. They can't be talking on two different platforms. So how do you ensure that you have a common interface for both of them? Will be some things like that the tech leaders have to then focus on to build to build that coherence between various team members. And it doesn't matter whether you're a small bit or large. I think the end of it, a large company is a macrocosm of a bunch of smaller, let's say, teams.
Right.
Each team is almost today a company. I think you can't have a very large, like in the old industry, or let's say old economy, like a huge manufacturing team and a huge sales team and stuff like that. All of those things are gone. People are working on projects. I think the key thing is everyone is focused on one single project. You have like 100 projects. A large company will have 100 projects to work towards. A smaller company will have, let's say, 2 projects to work towards. I'm not talking a project in the traditional sense of getting work or contract from someone else. Every objective becomes a small project, and you keep running. You keep rolling, adding more and more projects as you go along. So ensuring that the technological stance that you adopt enables that collaboration between various team members in a seamless way will become the only thing. And from a solution perspective, there are solutions that are that in the past have been on-prem, blah blah blah, all of that. But I think all of this straight away goes to it'll be a cloud-based SaaS kind of a solution where you just pay as you go. So it's easier for companies to start investing as well. There's no large, significantly large upfront investment like in the past. For example, if you have to build, if in the past, if you had to do a large ERP implementation, you're talking of billions of millions of dollars being committed upfront. I think that movement has already started. Now you don't need to start marrying yourself and a lot of money being spent upfront. Instead, you can go on the SaaS model and build the same and use the same stuff and pay as you go along. And that's a critical element as well. So from a strategy perspective, it is less of a tech strategy issue. It is more about people strategy issue. How do you get your people enabled to work cohesively in a seamless manner, in a personalized manner? How do you use tech to remove all the mundane stuff in an employee's life? How does the employee focus on the software elements more? I think those become more important. The tech strategy is actually, as I said, it's not going to be such a critical thing. I think tech is available, solutions are available all over the place. Have you defined your problem correctly? Have you defined what you need to solve correctly? If you've done those two things, tech tools, frameworks are all things that are available. It is easy, and there are enough people to advise you on that as well.
I think, Rajeev, there was one interesting thing I feel like, I'm seeing also, right? We're all like the founders, the entrepreneurs of our own work, so we drive the way we work. So in that context, I feel like there are though a few things that for us, or let's say for employees and organizations to work together in, right? Because when each one has become the founder of their own work, what I'm noticing is that there's some kind of a collaboration miss, or you're creating a silo with somebody else in some other team, when perhaps you should be actually communicating everything you're doing, because at the end of the day, for an organization, it is everybody coming together, right, to do, to perform or to kind of move ahead. So in that context, I have two questions for you. One is, how should teams collaborate better when every individual is now at their own island? And second, we're talking about technology being the enabler in the organization, which is something I totally buy. But what kind of a behavioral shift will it take from an individual to adapt to technology in their day-to-day life to, ensure that we're a cohesive team? I
Sure.
think these are the two questions I have as a follow-up to what you were talking about.
Sure, sure. So I think you kind of hit the right things, right? The technology is an enabler for sure, and you have, and one of the things that's opened up, and I'll probably take a step back, is that today you are not bound by physical geography for anything, right? So you when you're hiring a team, your replacement for a particular resource could come from Japan. The original resource was in India, or there could be a replacement, or there could be a team that you're building where every member of the team is in a completely different geography, right? So all of those things are definitely possible. How do you get them to collaborate together? And that is where the frameworks really come in. How do you define a common purpose? There are three things, three layers as I see it. One, definition of the purpose has to be absolutely critical and crystal clear. So objectiveness becomes critical. You can't have any more subjective indicators that you it has to be clearly, I mean, going back to basics, like having a smart measurement, SMART, as a key framework for defining your goals becomes important. Is it measurable? Is every action of yours clearly measurable? Can it be demonstrated? So these are the two things that will be there. Second, the role of that person who's putting all these pieces together becomes even more important. How do you piece these things together and fit it into one single whole? And that's a key skill to have. That is a skill that requires you to visualize the future. That is a skill that requires you to visualize and break it down into smaller components and give it to various elements to the team members. Third, identifying the right person for that particular job. Therefore, that is where the assessments part come in, right? And I spoke a little briefly earlier about how assessments have progressed, but I've still not reached that perfect stage of greatly accurately arriving at the right fitment. I think that becomes more and more critical. And fitment is just not a skill anymore. It is skill, it is culture, it is remote working ability. For example, remote working ability is a great cultural trait for you to, or behavioral trait for you to build. That it involves resilience, it involves self-starting. All of these things are critical. So can you, when you're hiring a next remote guy or a remote person, guy is obviously the wrong word here, remote person, do you have enough knowledge about that person to say that that person is resilient and can work remotely as a self-starter? That becomes critical. But once you have that as well, as you said, team is a bunch of is like a piece of there is a great thing that says, right, that the sum of parts is greater than the whole, right? So therefore, if you look at it, you will have to identify the right pieces of the puzzle to come in correctly. And for that, you will have to, apart from evaluating someone's skills and resilience, you also now need to figure out the fitment from a team perspective. If you have a team that has got, let's say, 5 different pieces fit together, the 6th piece has to fit the remaining 5 pieces properly. And that becomes important as well. That is where behavioral assessments come in, team culture based assessments come in. So there are a bunch of things that are there around it. There are companies, for example, Dotton is there's a company called Dotton in the US, which has a very unique team fitment evaluation that you do for every new company that your new employee they're trying to hire. They give you a tool using which you can figure out whether the new addition to the team will enable the team or disrupt the team, right? Some of those things become critical. The next element is to what have you done as a leader to build trust in the team? Do they trust each other? Have you enabled that? Are you allowing, for example, first level failures? Is it easy to fail in an organization, right? Is failures taken as something that you will look at it very, very aggressively? For example, the first time get it right kind of a thing is definitely already gone, right? People are moving away from that and saying that we want you to fail, but we want you to fail to ensure that you learn, right? That becomes critical. So is that culture being built in? Have you built in a culture where no one feels any, have you built in a culture of a psychologically safe workplace where expressing yourself is absolutely natural. You don't have to put on any guard. You don't have to shield. You don't have to kind of sugarcoat your response and stuff like that. Or you don't have to be worried about what will others think if I give this contribution to this particular project. Have you created the psychologically safe workspace, and have you done it at the leadership level? Have you ensured that that has become a culture? Some of these things become important from an HR perspective as well. If you put all of these things together, I think the thing about working independently in silos and each one being his or her own CEO will not be much of an issue, because you're all bound together by a common objective. You have a tool, you have tools and frameworks that will help you to align yourself to that, and you have trust between the various team members. You are in a psychologically safe workspace. You respect what the other team member brings onto the table, and therefore with all of this you will find things, and you don't have to worry about some of the mundane stuff that you need to do, for example filling up a form and updating some stuff, etc., because all of you are working on a common piece of a digital asset, which will ensure that you can do this in a much more seamless way.
Got it. To me, it seems like, though, as you were talking, Rajiv, and I was just imagining our own workplace, right? So that's what happens when you kind of, when someone's explaining these concepts to you. I think the one thing that that I believe, I don't know, would love to hear from you on this is, do you think that there, this kind of the way we're now working and this cohesion, do you think it needs to come from the CEO? Do you think it needs to come from the HR team? Or do you think there's something that there's a new role only that can actually be formed over here, somebody who's like this bringing together person, creating the entire goals for each function, ensuring that everybody's talking to each other, staying on top of things. I don't know if you call them chief of staff, or what whether it is also a chief of staff equivalent, but for an online world, because
Sure,
there has to
sure.
be some way to kind of make sense of all the technology that you have. But also I think that there has to be somebody who's also responsible for it. So my question actually is that the CEO, is that the CHRO, or is it a completely entirely new function, you would believe? Or is there even a need to create a new function?
Sure. See, at the end of it, unless the top buys it, it doesn't flow into the organization for sure. So with the CEO and the CHRO have to be completely bought into it. If there is a need to create a new function, it means that the HR is not doing its job. This is purely HR's job to be that mirror holding cohesive gel that you can create for every team, right? The HR has to show the mirror, so whether it is through frameworks and tools, etc. If in this entire concept, I think there are certain things that the world already does. For example, in the entire agile world of software, right, there is this position called Scrum Master. The Scrum Master's role is exactly almost similar to this. The Scrum Master ensures that everyone's commitment is getting, there's a reflection to say, well, this is what you did, this have you done this is what you did, have you done this, is it all of this, is it fitting well into that particular technology or product roadmap or whatever you have? I mean, in a sense, I'm not saying that's the function that you need here, but something like that for interconnected teams. So for example, if you have a marketing team resource that actually can do this for marketing and sales, or it could be a GTM resource, for example. Just call it for example, a front-facing team member could be GTM, and internal-facing could be anything else. But the job is, I mean, it's not really. It is required for starting things off, because people are moving into this entire thing. Initially, to ensure that you work together towards it, it is required. But as you go along, I think it'll come very naturally to you. And HR just has to enable that. They have to put the frameworks and the platforms in place and build the culture. I think that's what I would want to stress on. From an HR perspective, have you spent enough time with various team members in right from understanding the right set of people to be hired all the way to performance management, to build that team, to build a culture where everyone talks to each other freely, shares ideas, and works together towards a common good? I think that becomes an important element of this entire concept. So to answer your question, I don't think a new officer or a new position is required. It is completely HR's function, but it has to have a complete buy-in from the top.
That's very interesting, Rajiv. So now that we're clear that, hey, we don't probably need another new role, we don't need all of these things to happen essentially. The next priority, if I were the CEO, if I were the CHR, would be budgets. how do I plan budgets for this change? Now that you've spoken about collaboration, inclusivity, and all of these concepts, and in theory, I buy all of these things. But at the end of the day, it comes down to really how much can I really spend on these things to make it happen, whether in terms of resources, tools, or any other thing that might be there, right? Even workshops as well, for that matter. So how do you think that, what kind of budgets will this involve, again, for various size company sizes, and how should CHR essentially plan this implementation phase? What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. So typically, when you talk about budgets, you talk about it with a specific small project in mind or some small outcome in mind. Uh, if you and if you look at it, if you start looking at ROI from an ROI kind of a perspective, these are things that so you will do when you will do all of this if there is a choice. Today there is no choice for you. You have to spend on this. There's no other option for 2-3 reasons. One, as I said, you're going to have a bunch of remote workers all over the world. You will have people working in silos independently. You will need a measurement. You need a mechanism to see how all of these bits and pieces work together. You will have employees who are coming in who are expecting that kind of. For example, if you an employee that's coming in, most employees, I think maybe in the next, in the near future itself, I don't think you can bind them by time. So things like, for example, in the pandemic, people did workation and stuff like that, right? People going and working on their own. That will become absolutely common because physical location is no more consideration. That will be demanded by employees. An employee will say, look, if you're expecting me to come into the office 9 to 5 every day for 5 days a week, 52 weeks a year, that's not me. I don't want to do that, right? So because those things are there, it is imperative for it to invest in technology. Is there a specific budget you need to carve out? You need to look at the budget, comparing it against what is it that you're getting in return. You are getting a situation where you are removing mundane stuff. You are putting human back into HR, a human back into employees, right? It is a human to human interaction. Your time at work should not be in doing mundane stuff. So that is getting taken care of. So you are investing in automation there. Second, you are investing in collaboration tools, without which you can't survive because your people are in multiple places. Without how will you do it? So if an HR guy says that, HR head says that, look, I completely buy your concept and I want my employees all over the world, but I'm not going to invest in HR tool, collaboration tool. It doesn't have any meaning at all. So budgets have to be seen more from not from an immediate outcome perspective, but more like from an imperative perspective. It is imperative to invest in these technologies no matter what. Otherwise you have completely missed the bus. It's not a choice anymore. The moment if you remove the word choice completely, then I think budgets become immaterial. Yes, you still have to compare solution A versus solution B. I think that is more from what each solution offers. The value has the pricing for that has to come as a reflection of what the solution offers, not about saying that, hey, this year my HR budget is 2 crores. So first of all, it's not an HR budget. I think that's the first thing that we need to remove. This is a company budget, right? This is a company-wide exercise. It is being led by HR is a different issue. So if HR says that until last year my HR budget was only, let's say, 2 crores a year or $200,000 a year, and you are asking me to invest into a technology that will cost me $30,000, where do I get it out? I think the 30,000 should not come from the 200,000 at all. It is coming from a much larger budget. More importantly, this 30,000 is not just helping improve efficiencies. Your overall business performance is improving. You have to start linking into that, right? You getting your best. I'll give you a classic example. A friend of mine runs a startup based out of Calcutta, and he was searching for a marketing officer. Searched in that area, they just couldn't get it, right? The marketing officer they hired comes from somewhere in Estonia today, right? So that is the benefit, and that person has driven extreme success for this organization, right? Which they would never have done in the pre-pandemic world. The pandemic forced them to look out. They found the right person and got that person in. So but to get to that person, you use multiple tools. You would have invested in a Zoom, or you would have done a bunch of other things. You would have done virtual onboarding. All of these things are stuff that you need to know. You don't have an option today, right? So if you look at budget in that way, I don't think this can be a barrier at all. It is about saying that this is required for me to go forward. It is like an essential spend. It's no more a budget that you can carve out of something.
That makes a lot of sense, especially the fact, I like the fact that you mentioned that, hey, this is not an HR budget, this is a company budget, because essentially the HR is trying to deal with people, trying to deal with the actual heart of the company, trying to redrive, the engine of the company in that sense, which a lot of people don't look at this fine line in the sand. So extending the same idea, I really want to understand how the business goals and how the organization goals going to change because of all these new tools and all this new sort of culture coming into place, right? Which is more accountable, more closing it together. Right? How do you think the goals will change? Do you think they will have any effect on the goals? Even the day-to-day metric and KPI measurement. How do you think that will change?
I don't think that needs to change, because you're only trying to make the business more efficient, or not trying. It will become more efficient, right? There is nothing that you need to factor in saying that, oh, because of remote work my business is going to change completely, or it'll get broken up, and or whatever it is. Your business's objectives continue. It's just that it becomes far more efficient to reach there. It just that tools have come in that enable more efficient movement towards your goal. So I don't think business outcomes need to change. There are certain things that you change. For example, learning and development, right, is a function that you will see a huge amount of change for two reasons. One, you are already getting in people who are gig workers, who are saying that, look, I am going to be in a company for just 6 months or 1 year or 2 years. If that is a case that you, as compared to someone you are hiring for life even 5-6 years ago, right, where you had a lot of time to work on that person, make him better, etc. So learning and development will change completely, because you can't now invest 2 months of time, 3 months of trying to get someone in. So it'll have to be, you will have to first of all hire more accurately. You can't get someone saying that I will work on this person for the next 20 years and make him a leader. You hire more accurately. Whatever small gaps are, you will use technology enabled tools. So learning development, for example, bite-sized learning is a huge concept today, right? Bite-sized learning can be repackaged to ensure that the small gaps that you have from an employee perspective for that particular role can be quickly handled. Cultural changes, for example. Today you have apps that enable you to check for cultural change. For every time you do something in line with the culture, you just log into the app, right? The app also reminds you, saying that, have you done this today? Have you done this today? Culture. So the technology enables you to do all of those things, right? So business outcome don't have to change, but there are processes that will need to change. How will you hire, for example? Your hiring is completely changed today, right? You're not going to call the candidate to 10 rounds of interviews at work. You'll do it through online, through video interviews. You'll use a lot of analytics, for example. A huge chunk of analytics today. In fact, analytics is driving HR in a big way. Insights into how it is. There are analytics that tell interviewers what is the next question you should actually ask the candidate. It's as simple as that. It's making the interviewing process much more effective and efficient. So you will use all of those to improve your individual processes, but your overall goals are not going to change. You will find employees being far more efficient because they don't have to spend so much time on the mundane transactional stuff. You can hold employees accountable for the human interactions that they will have with other employees. I mean, those are things that will change, and for that, as I said, HR will play a critical role. HR will play a central role to this entire thing as we go forward.
Right. These are some pretty interesting insights on that front. So, Rajiv, to sort of conclude this entire experience and all these, insights that you shared with us, how do you sum up that in terms of a playbook that people can really adopt, right, for the next, 6 months of next year as well? Because in a very short-term span, how do they get from where they are today, which is, let's say, ground zero? How do they go to the next step one, right, with applying all the insights that you gave, which is inclusivity, choosing your tools, and all of these things, right? What would your recommendation be there?
Sure. I think the first thing is to figure out where you are, and each one's ground zero is different. Not every company is on the same ground zero, so that it can't be a standard, the same start point for everyone. Each one is at a different stage. So identifying where you are is important.
So Rajiv, yes, I'm sorry to interject. So to give you to sort of emphasize on this point better, how does one really assess in a more neutral way that, look, this is where I am, do an honest retrospective about themselves? What would your quick recommendation be there as well?
So, as I said, this has to be an initiative that has to be driven right from the top, right? You need to carve out a bunch of specialists to do this introspection for an organization. Identify where you are, identify where your gaps are. Now, gap could be, for example, inclusion as a culture, right? So I remember recently having done a survey, and we found that while people talk about D&I in a big way, 85% of employees don't feel included, right? So which basically means that there is a huge gap there as far as that is concerned. So that is one. I spoke about digital literacy. Today, where are you on digital literacy? There are companies today struggling to even onboard employees on Microsoft Outlook, right? Forget the other tools that are more advanced tools. So where are you on the digital literacy journey? Have you enabled digital comfort for every element of the employee's work life cycle, whether it is recording goals, recording work, collaborating, interacting? Where are you on it? Getting tools is one part. but are your employees ready for that is the first thing. Then identify the tools, train people on it, inculcate cultural values that promote inclusivity and inclusivity into the way of life, and then ensure that you have processes that measure whether all of these things are progressing in the right direction. Put up milestones like you do in a typical project. Have an end outcome saying that at the end of 6 months I will have no physical meetings, could be an outcome. At the end of 6 months I will have no let's say no recruitment being done in office, everything is being done remotely. Those are the kind of outcomes that you'll have for every department. For sales, for example, I mean, this is not just restricted to just HR or internal flows. Even for example sales, you will find that a lot of sales will be done digitally now. It will be online. You will not be expected to walk with a briefcase into a client's office or prospect's office and have an interaction, because that's not that. All of things, those things are gone. Yeah, the person that you need to meet might not even be in the same city. He'll be completely some other part of the world. You can't keep traveling all over the place, right? You're going to be online. So your outcomes will be saying that, so X percentage of my sales will be completely driven by a digital strategy. X percentage of marketing will be completely driven by digital marketing strategy. Interactions will be on a digital platform. These are objectives you will set, and then you will move towards it depending on where you are today. For example, if you're very comfortable doing physical meetings, you can't say tomorrow that from tomorrow onwards everyone is on digital platforms, right? You will have to progress that journey. You will have to evangelize, saying why it is important. You will have to introduce tools. You'll have to explain how those tools move, how the tools are used. You'll have to demonstrate that using that actually improves your overall efficiency, and then only you are able to take it forward. So but all of this said, it has to be a top level initiative. It has to come from the CEO's office. The CHRO has to be fully clued in on it. The top management has to be fully clued in on it, and only then it can get percolated downwards into the organization.
Very interesting. Nisha, do you have any thoughts on this? Any concluding thoughts?
Not really. I kind of liked the flow that you were sharing, Rajiv. I think what it kind of got me thinking was literally the CHRO will have to redefine organization culture, to a certain extent, and then take people along. I think the core of our conversation has been that people are at the heart of this. So while you're redefining organization strategy of how the organization itself is going to be communicating with each other, and what communicating with customers, etc., will be. I think somewhere the culture will also change a lot, and people will have to kind of adapt themselves to this new work culture, which is kind of plug and play. You put it in, it's there, you take it off, and you can kind of just kind of
Right. Absolutely.
escape to
Right.
some extent. Yeah, that's really what I was thinking about. But no more questions from me, Rajiv. Thank you so much.
Very interesting, Rajiv. This
Pleasure.
is a fantastic session. In fact, I hope all you listeners have also enjoyed this session. In fact, to give you like a follow up after this, all of Rajiv details are going to be, of course, mentioned, alongside this podcast as well. And be sure to check out our previous episodes as well. So we had the first episode with Bhagyashree Pancholi, founder of All Remotely, where we discussed a lot of tax and compliance structures that applies in the case of remote first, work from anywhere and work from home. And the second episode with Dr. Sana, we spoke about the behavioral science, the behavioral science aspect of how humans have essentially changed in terms of how they've transitioned from, pre-COVID, during COVID, and post-COVID, right? And all of these things. And Rajiv has given us some fantastic insights that I think that all of us can really start applying and thinking about from today onwards. So Rajiv, seriously, thanks a lot for sharing this information with us. It was an amazing episode. We'll catch you up next week again with another exciting episode of the Edge podcast of CHROs. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Pleasure. Thank you.